The world looks to California to answer the hard questions, for redemption, to introduce the unfamiliar, to be resilient. Because California bounces back, holds us accountable, values who we are, remains vigilant, defies those in our way, and stands for community. Here on the West Coast, we're at the center of it all. Los Angeles Times, the state of what's next.
Great. Good evening. I'm Justin Chang, film critic for the Los Angeles Times, and welcome to week 4 of the Ultimate Summer Movie Showdown, the LA Times series where you get to choose the greatest summer movies of all time. With theaters closed and major Hollywood releases being held back due to the COVID-19 pandemic, my Times colleagues and I asked ourselves, what if instead of having the worst summer movie season ever, we polled our readers and came up with the ultimate summer movie season? singling out the best movies from each week of release, going back to 1975, the summer of a little movie called Jaws. Each week, for 16 weeks, we are pooling some of the best or most memorable big movies from each week of release, and we're letting you vote for your favorites in a series of head-to-head contests on Twitter. The winner will be the subject of a retrospective piece in the Times and of a video discussion like this one. Our first three winners were The Avengers, Bridesmaids, and Mad Max Fury Road. 2 weeks ago, we were fortunate to be joined by Bridesmaids star and co-writer Kristen Wiig and co-writer Annie Mumolo. Last week, we were thrilled to welcome Mad Max Fury Road director George Miller, and we have another wonderful guest for tonight's movie. And this week, Times readers, you chose Ridley Scott's 1979 science fiction horror landmark, Alien. Written by Dan O'Bannon and showcasing the groundbreaking character designs of the Swiss artist H.R. Giger, Alien featured the actors Tom Skerritt, John Hurt, Yaphet Kotto, Veronica Cartwright, Ian Holm, Harry Dean Stanton, and of course, the incomparable Sigourney Weaver as Ellen Ripley. Alien premiered May 25th, 1979, on opening night of the Seattle International Film Festival and was released in US theaters that same Memorial Day weekend. The 20th Century Fox release was an immediate commercial hit and won the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects and was also Oscar nominated for Best Production Design. Although the movie was not a unanimous critical success at first, in the 41 years since, Alien has since been reclaimed and justly recognized as a masterpiece of modern horror and a work of speculative fiction worthy of that overused word, visionary. And so now, I'm thrilled to welcome our special guest, a filmmaker whose reputation, of course, goes well beyond Alien. Ridley Scott is a three-time Academy Award nominee for Best Director. His many other films include Blade Runner, Thelma and Louise, Gladiator, Black Hawk Down, The Counselor, and The Martian, and many more. Ridley Scott is one of Hollywood's great visual storytellers and a filmmaker who has consistently cut against the industry grain by embracing stories in which women are front and center. You see this in Alien. You also see it in Thelma and Louise, which was one of our runners-up in this week's Ultimate Summer Movie Showdown. He's a filmmaker I admire greatly for these and other reasons, including his rigorously unsentimental view of the human condition, his willingness to explore tough ideas about philosophy and morality within a commercial Hollywood framework, and his insistence on making his movies his way and no one else's. And so, ladies and gentlemen, with that, please join me in welcoming the talented Mr. Ridley Scott. Ridley, welcome to the Ultimate Summer Movie Showdown, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening.
Thank you for asking me.
This is a very strange moment for all of us, of course, which is the reason why we're so excited to talk to filmmakers and to see how they're doing. How are you doing? How is pandemic life treating you right now? I know you're in Los Angeles. How's life going?
Well, it's a great opportunity to get all those unfinished scripts finished because I have more time to sit down and study them closely and work at arm's length with the writers. And so it's actually pretty useful because I had to break the film I was doing in France 9 weeks ago. So we still have to work out when we're returning to finish it off whenever.
And that film, of course, The Last Duel, you're used to delivering on very tight, extra tight deadlines. Are things expected to stay on schedule, or is there anything you can tell us about progress at this point?
We're usually way ahead. I come from the School of Live TV, where I was at BBC for 3 years, and that's where I learned to use 6 cameras at once on live television. So I carried that forward to in the way I work today, and it actually is incredibly useful because you have to predetermine, really work out what you're going to do way before you get there. You can't wait till the morning to say, what are we going to do? And I think that's why we move pretty quickly.
Yeah. Just right now, this pandemic is obviously really devastating for theaters, for exhibitors, for the industry. It's a business that was, of course, very tough to begin with. How do you feel about are you feeling optimistic or pessimistic or in between about theaters, about movies, about how they're going to weather this in the long run, and will there be a re-embrace of movies once they're back with us?
There's something part of the job that we do for a living, because to make a movie is an entirely illogical process where you bring a whole bunch of people together to a blueprint called a script. You all meet on the morning, frequently for the first time, and somehow you put it together. So if you're not an optimist, you shouldn't be actually in the film industry. So I guess I'm an optimist. We'll find the way. This too will pass.
That's very heartening to hear. And this is a series on summer movies because the summer movie season has been suspended for this year at the moment. You've directed a lot of summer movies. We had Gladiator in this competition a few weeks ago, Alien and Thelma and Louise this week. Blade Runner will be coming up soon. I know you're a cinephile, you're steeped in movies, and your life is steeped in movies to begin with, but do you have any particular favorite summer movies or fond memories that you associate with summer movie-going over the past 45 years, since Jaws in particular?
No, from my point of view, my movies, everyone is my favorite child. There's no regrets about anything I've done. And even looking back, thinking, would I have done it differently? Not really, because by the time you go through the editing process, that in a way is a system where you actually get any of the second guessing out of the way, and you actually have to commit. The great thing about film making, particularly from a director's point of view, you have to commit and you have to make your mind up.
Yeah. That's a good segue to talking about this week's movie, Alien. And, this series we're doing, it's a little silly, it's a little arbitrary. It beat the original Star Wars this week. And the only reason they were in the same bracket was because they were both released the same week, 2 years apart, practically to the day. How do you feel about the fact that Alien prevailed this week, given that just the huge popularity of Star Wars, of course, but also the impact that Star Wars had on you? I know it inspired you to say yes to Alien in the first place. Can you talk about just that?
Yeah, I think Star Wars, George's Star Wars, was seminal. In the same way that 2001 was seminal, it opened the gate for me on me feeling comfortable that science fiction was no longer silly fantasy, but actually had a reality to it, which I always like to come from that direction. And Star Wars was, in a funny kind of way, the antithesis of 2001, and yet it felt real. So I was blown away. I think I was depressed for a month when I saw it, because I thought, how on earth could he have done that? And I think I was nursing the idea of doing Tristan and Isolde at that point, which was nothing wrong with Tristan and Isolde, but in today's world, you can expect a pretty narrow audience for that kind of subject.
Yeah, and I wish we'd sometimes curious to see what Tristan and Isolde what you would have made of that, because your first film, of course, was The Duelists, more in that vein of period drama, of course. Yeah. Can you talk about just and I know there were other directors, of course, considered before. Alien was only your second film. Just that sort of pivot from going from one thing to just taking on something so completely different. Yeah.
I was a pretty good art director, and my whole background was fundamentally art direction, art school, very good art school. In those days, art school training was as long as the doctor's, 7 years. And interestingly, I used every day what I learned at art school, because I learned to commit from my mind to my hand, where I'll actually draw my storyboards. Personally, I draw the boards because it makes me film it on paper before I get there. So you're pretty committed and pretty worked out. And the art direction helped me in my transition to become a director. And it consequently means I can move faster, I guess. I'm pretty quick.
And just that meticulous level of storyboarding that you do, I know it was crucial to persuading Fox to increase the budget on the film. Was it sort of? It feels as though Alien is like the A picture version of a B picture, if you'll pardon that.
Well, no, it was. I thought Alien was, with the greatest respect to Dan and Ben, Ronnie Shusett, in a funny kind of way, it was definitely a B movie, which somehow evolved into an A way. And that said, sometimes B movies have great dynamics. that what we had in it was a great dynamic. I was the fifth choice. So by the time it got to me, I think they were beginning to wonder, did they have a film? And I read it. I think it took me an hour and 45 minutes in London. That afternoon at 6 o'clock, I called Hollywood, and I was standing there exactly 4 days later saying, I know what to do. And from that moment on, I learned never to walk into a meeting at the studio with millions of notes, because you can turn a go movie into a development deal. You never want to do that. Just go and say, I think it's great. Any change? No.
Speaking of just A pictures and B pictures, I was watching Alien again the other night, and what seems so remarkable about it now, and also even the first time I saw it, is the patience of the filmmaking. You have about 45 minutes of very slow build-up.
Right.
Terror just really builds from within, and I think it feels even more radical now than it must have back in '79. It feels closer in its pacing to some, European art films that you see now than contemporary blockbusters. Why was it so important to build it so slowly? And do you think that level of patience would be hard to impossible to pull off today?
It's I fought for the 45 minutes with that. They said nothing much happens. I said, are you kidding? I'm taking on a journey into a place you haven't seen before, and nothing happens, but a lot happens. You are being introduced to a universe that you haven't seen. So I always regard it as a lot happening, but they always wanted to shorten it and quicken it. This tends to be the, dare I say, knee-jerk attitude towards, let's get it going as fast as you can. Of course, you can and should for certain subjects, but in this instance, I thought it was worth holding the reins on it. So when you let it go, you are so tense that once I let that happen, the first real thing was John Hurt looking into the egg. And I remember in St. Louis, we were testing, somebody screamed in the audience, don't look in the egg, and it exploded. So in a sense, I think it was very much enjoyed like a great B movie, but the way it was done and the actors, et cetera, I think it elevated itself.
Yeah, the effects in this movie are, of course, extraordinary and groundbreaking. I know you said, though, that you didn't necessarily see it as an effects film first and foremost, that this is also a character piece, and the actors in the film are, of course, so memorable, and not just Sigourney Weaver, but Tom Skerritt, Veronica Cartwright, Harry Dean Stanton. What is your approach to actors in a movie that is, where the effects are so important, where you have to be so exacting in terms of the technical aspects? Do you approach it in a more loose, spontaneous way with the actors? Yeah.
I learned from live TV. Sometimes actors will, I don't know whether they're going to be amused by this or not. Sometimes directors talk too much. And my big thing is casting really well. I'm a very good caster. Once I've casted, I feel the artiste, the actor, becomes my partner in the process. There's no Svengali bullshit in my universe, because I've cast a person who will take care of that part because they are the virtuoso of who they are. And therefore, all I can do is sit there like a conductor and keep it simple, saying faster, quicker, up a bit, down a bit. And some of the best actors have said to me, that's the best instruction you can give me. The key to any budding director is really make sure you're casted properly. They'll take care of you.
We were talking about just Star Wars and the vision of space, this very, and the way it felt real, whether it's realistic or not. Alien really subverted, I think, that view of outer space where everything looks clean and white and borderline sterile. You gave us this spaceship, which we come to know very intimately as the camera is just exploring that space, and it's a very dank and gooey and dark and rainy. It was just unlike anything we'd seen before. What was behind your decision? I mean, was it just making the anti-Star Wars, making the anti-2001, even in some respects?
Star Wars it had its own reality. Some people call Star Wars, in a way, a fairy story. There's the prince and there's the princess. But Star Wars, the great thing about Star Wars, however fantastic the universe was, it felt real. That's essential. And that's why when I was doing Blade Runner, the city of the future had to feel real. And so that's what I really admired about what George did, because even the fantastic characters such as R2-D2, C-3PO, all these people, they were real. And my hat still comes off to George for doing that. Without question, his was by far the best, still.
We must talk, I know, about the famous chestburster scene, which, of course, you can't talk about this movie without talking about that. It is one of those scenes that is as impactful, I think, in film history as the shower scene in Psycho, where you almost feel as though some sacred contract with the audience has been broken. I know this was when you were planning it, I mean, of course it was going to be shocking, but knowing this was such a pivotal scene in the movie, did you expect that it was going to galvanize the audience quite the degree that it did?
When you're doing a film, you get a sense that you're doing something special. And I can't remember the number of weeks in I was on the kitchen scene, but clearly it had to be late in the kitchen scene, because once I blew blood all over that set, there was no cleaning it up. So it may have been the last week in that space. And I'd kept it very much from the actors, and I'd kept the actual little creature, whatever that would be, from the actors. I never wanted them to see it. So all that is true. When I walked them in the morning, there was difficulty because remember, there's no digital effects in those days at all. I've got to somehow bring that creature out of his chest. And so the person that really put through hell was John Hurt, who had to lie in an S-bend, kneel in an S-bend under the table, coming through a fiberglass chest with a T-shirt on it, which of course was his. And so on action, he had to lie back as if the chest was part of his anatomy. And I remember Stanley Kubrick called me up saying, "How do you do that?" He said, "I've run it through slowly. I can't see the cut." And I said, and I just said that much. He said, "Okay, I got it. It worked." But when it came out, it had to be a one-shot situation, because up to that moment, I'm a camera operator, so I was operating throughout Alien, and I was only using, of course, one camera in those days, but what they call the Panavision, the pig, which goes on your shoulder and weighs a ton, it's like 60 pounds. But in the kitchen scene, I placed 5 cameras, because I knew once the blood went under those pressure hoses, the set was a wipeout. So I had to get it in one shot. So all that was got in one shot, which is kind of interesting. You don't go back. I couldn't go back for like 3 weeks and a paint job.
And I understand. I mean, I've seen there's just shots and outtakes from that amazing scene. At one point, the alien didn't fully come up right away, and you had to go in there, right, with like a razor blade and cut it out.
Well,
all in one take.
It came out and it bumped in his shirt, and I screamed, "Cut!" Okay, and the actors all screamed but laughed and said, "Get rid of them, get them off the set." And I went in and I had to razor blade the T-shirt on John Hurt's artificial chest, and hope that it would just blow up next time, and boy, it did.
There have been chestburster scenes like in Alien Covenant and done, I presume, with visual effects now, or I imagine the technology is different.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, are you kidding? It's much easier now, dude.
Yeah.
No question. Oh my God.
No question. But it's, you know, and it's funny now because when I saw that, it was almost kind of comforting when I saw that in Alien Covenant. And it's like, oh, you know, this is, yes, we're in an Alien movie. It almost becomes a kind of brand recognition. And, you know, what is it like restaging that scene? You know, there's something kind of poignant about seeing it now, especially 40 years later, when you're doing it with the digital technology and without quite as much of a shock factor. And yet at the same time, it never really grows old seeing that.
You know, there's something about real. The most frightening film I've ever seen, apart from, would be The Exorcist one. You know, it was so well made. But the really scary one, I will admit, was Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I was preparing Alien, and the challenge was, you know, to really, really frighten people is tricky. You can make people laugh. I'm not saying it's easy. I think it is easy to make people laugh. But to really scare people to a state of catatonia, if that's such a word, and terror is hard. And so I sat in the one little Fox screening rooms at lunchtime going through the films that were meant to be frightening. And the one film I'd never seen, mainly because of the poster, because the poster being very disturbing. And in Piccadilly Circus, I saw this poster seeing, what was his name, with the chainsaw. Did they call him Pigface? Yeah. And there he was. And it was so disturbing, I never saw the film. Now I've got it, and I'm sitting in this theater all by myself. And I remember Walter Hill came in behind me and sat behind me, and we both had hamburgers. And we were running it, and Walter said, "What are you watching this stuff for?" And I said, "I've heard it's pretty good." By the end of the movie, we were both catatonic, and we hadn't eaten the hamburger. That was a tough film. Wow. I mean, also, you know, I learned from Alien as a director or as a storyteller, as an author, you have a kind of responsibility to how far you go. And I did learn this from we did a lot of previewing. And I remember the previews where I wouldn't sit in the theater, I'd walk down the side and look at the audience who didn't know they were being watched. And the condition of the audience, by the time you got to the breakfast scene and something started to happen, and Ian Holmes said, "This is serious," they were halfway into the seat, and there was a little disturbing. I was a little disturbed about how frightened some people got. It wasn't healthy. But I think the studio loved it.
So you didn't pull back or anything, even despite that reaction. It was not.
Nah, you know, I was so used to it by then. I said whatever, you know, by then. But it was, yeah.
Made the right call for sure.
Yeah.
You have to talk about just the character of Ripley, of course. Another word, iconic, that is overused, but really can't be overused in this case. As played by Sigourney Weaver, one of the great action heroes in cinema. Can you talk about just the decision to make Ripley a woman, given I believe the character was originally written as a man, or was that the case, or was it a kind of a unit script?
I think I think the idea actually came from Alan Ladd Jr. It may have been Guy Ladd, but I think it was Alan Ladd who said, why can't Ripley be a woman? And there was a long pause. And, you know, at that moment, I never thought about it. I thought, why not? You know, it's a fresh direction, the ways I thought about that. And away we went. And I found Sigourney by word of mouth. Somebody had been told that Sigourney was on off-Broadway stage doing something that I should meet. And I did, and there it was. She was perfect in terms of scale, size, intelligence. Her acting was fantastic. And so it was made for her, really.
You are known as a director who has consistently placed women front and center in your movies, and especially so early on.
Yeah.
And I don't think, and given the budgets of your films, the audience, the size of the audience that they reach, I don't think we should take that for granted. Why do you think Hollywood although progress has been made, the industry continues to struggle with that, or it took so long for them to begin to address that when you were really doing it?
I never think about it. I never thought about it. I mean, it comes from, I think, my mother, who insisted she was 5 feet tall, but actually was 4'11", was a real tough guy. Because my dad was Army, so this woman brought up 3 boys, and one was Tony Scott, of Top Gun, etc. And then there was me, and my elder brother was a captain out of a Chinese company, did the South China Seas up to Shanghai when it was communist, and the Merchant Navy. So whatever she did to us, she brought us up to be very independent. And because of that, I always had this inordinate respect, without any questioning, about, who is, how do you put it? Who's the tough guy? Is it a woman or the man? I really don't care. But the companies that I've had over the last, 50 years in advertising, ironically, and that would be London, New York, Amsterdam, Hong Kong, and Los Angeles, 90% of them were run by women. In other words, the best man got the job. Always been that way. And I would always go for the person who is going to be the best at it,
Yeah, for sure. And you've continued this, of course, in with Prometheus, with Alien Covenant, within the universe, with actors like Charlize Theron and Noomi Rapace and Catherine Waterston.
But, a lot of people don't. They bypass a film. I thought that shouldn't be bypassed, because it had a definitive idea of a woman who wants to invest in the most male condition you could possibly want. A woman who wants to be a SEAL. And it's called G.I. Jane. The bad guy in it is a woman who is a senator who puts up this woman to be seen to support women, knowing she will fail. The thing is, she doesn't fail, she wins. And it was a very, very strong script at the time, and I thought it was pretty good. And I thought I should mention that.
Absolutely. And I want to talk to you about Thelma and Louise later as well, but we'll get to that toward the end. The movie is, of course, the result of a remarkable collaboration between you and the screenwriter Dan O'Bannon and H.R. Giger. It's impossible to think of Alien now without Giger's contribution, but I know that the studios resisted it because it was too extreme, too sexual, too graphic, what have you, can you talk about just having to persuading them that this was the look of Alien?
Well, what happened was I kind of befriended Dan because I felt Dan had been a bit pushed around. And so I'd spent time with Dan and Ronnie. And Dan was saying, I said, the thing that is the most challenging thing of all of this is I can get the sets right. Of course, we're going to get a great cast. I am most concerned about if I don't have a real, true, different creature, we're kind of be average to, not dead in the water, but we won't be that good. And Dan showed me a book called Necronomicon, and I could not believe the picture I saw was a profile of what essentially became the alien. I flew to Switzerland because HR would not fly. And I went to his house and met with HR, who was a very gentle, sweet man, and talked about bringing him to Shepperton Studios to help me make the movie. He said, well, I don't fly, and so I can't leave my mother. So, and this is the guy who designed the alien. So I finally got him on a train, and we trained him to shepherd, and he lived in the village for 10 months, and actually was a very good partner, very reliable, delivered on time, and always very willing to exchange, because I can draw, so our conversations could be drawing on, and that's the best conversation you have. If you can draw it. Picture's worth 1,000 words. Who said that? Hitchcock. So that was my relationship with HR. He was fantastic. But I thank Dan O'Bannon for putting him in front of me.
And I know that those images were things that occurred to him in his dreams, right? So it's almost as if we're getting a direct view into his unfiltered subconscious.
Yeah. Well, we had to draw him out a few times. He did like. Well, I won't say what he liked, but he did like stuff, and we had to keep an eye on him.
Alien has, of course, been analyzed to death as a movie about so many things, so many themes, just gender subversion and repressed sexuality and, capitalist greed. Yeah. It's funny, I was watching it the other night, and I think Ripley's line about quarantine protocol sticks out to all of us now, of course. So it feels like now this cautionary tale about the importance of proper quarantine procedures. It's been picked to death. And was all this stuff, though, on your mind when you were making the film? I mean, I'm sure you couldn't have imagined all of it, but does it surprise you that the movie B Picture has emerged as such a rich text over the years, and that there was so much more, there was so much in there than met the eye?
I mean, I think that's the beauty of film. Film, at a certain level, speaks to audiences in different ways. So, in a funny kind of way, it's a bit like music. I mean, good music. Good music has different voices for different people, and indeed, the best films have several layers where people will revisit and enjoy and explore and imagine. So sometimes I have things said to me afterwards about something I'd actually not really thought of, but I could see why. So it's a psychosis, and the best form of entertainment is a psychological experience,
Absolutely. And you say it's very, we each take our own interpretations from the movie and from all your movies. You've said, and I'm asking you this as a film critic, you've said you don't read reviews a lot or at all.
Never.
And yeah, and I'm curious, what made you decide just so decisively not to? And I should add too, many of your films have held up better than some of the initial reviews that they received, like Blade Runner, and if I dare say, The Counselor, which is one of my recent favorites of your films, and I think it's brilliant.
Yep.
Much maligned, I think. Is that why you don't read the press?
You're a smart man. Yeah, I mean,
thank you very much.
Should I answer it frankly? I'll answer it frankly. I always like to be frank. I frame in my office in LA. I have a framed 4-page article by a critic who destroyed Blade Runner in the months it came out. The destruction, honestly, was nearly suable. And the magazine at the time was a very high-end publication in New York. Actually, it was the New Yorker. And I read this article. I never even met her. And the article was kind of personal. It's bizarre. And from that, it was a lesson that I decided, remember, I haven't done a film since I was 40 years old when I made the Duelist, so I'm already maturing, hopefully at 40. I never read another critic after that because, as a, when you're a director in a funny kind of way, you are an author. You better be sure, I think I'm being read. You better be sure of your own authorship and what you've done. And once you're sure, put it out, walk away, and don't look back, ever. I never look back. I will hesitate to say who the critic was because it's been so long ago. If you want to look up who was the critic for the New York at that time, you'll find out.
Yes, and I do have a book on
yes,
my shelf.
It was brutal.
Yeah.
But actually, it was a great lesson for me.
Yeah, you are currently at work. You're on a lot of things, but you've revisited the Alien movies through prequels like Prometheus and Alien Covenant. I know the first film can of course never be topped, but I think it's really interesting the direction that you've taken these films to explore metaphysical considerations of the alien universe and to talk about the origins of life, the end of life in a more philosophical way. What's it been like returning to that franchise? Is it because I know in terms of a visceral experience, there's only so much more perhaps you can do, but is it because the ability to be philosophical? Is that a big reason for it for you?
Well, no, I think when I was making, I remember we previewed Alien at the planetarium or whatever it is in Pasadena. Is it the planetarium or a very nice building?
The Playhouse, yeah.
Yes, and there was a man there who was a very smart guy who became a star of television talking about the universe. And he said to me afterwards, came over, glass of champagne, and said, I know it's a movie, but of course it's ridiculous. There will be no aliens in your lifetime or my lifetime or anyone's lifetime. And so I said, relax, it's only a movie. And he said, okay. Now, from that moment on to where we are today, NASA openly admit there are millions of entities out there that have life forms. We know it. And so to deny it seems to be ridiculous. So to me, and we're already exploring those universes, of course, but we need to have a good one. I mean, when I say a good one, the less fantastical and more logical, right? Because in a funny kind of way, if we were pre-visited, which I really believe we were, it's kind of logical. And Stanley put that up as the forerunner in 2001 with a monolith, which an ape touches and has one big idea the next morning, where it picks up a thigh bone and uses a weapon. And so right there, that universe leaps forward 1 million years into evolution. And I thought that was brilliant. And that 2001 made a lot to me, actually, because when it ended, people said, well, what was that hotel room? Why was he sitting there? Why was he getting older? And I think he touches on the possibility of possibility. Is God simply a power that we can't quite comprehend, right? So do I sound crazy? I'm not crazy. This is very logical. And I can go on about this. I don't think I should, because I think we've got to keep these as shorter bites.
We do. I will just say really fast, I find this so fascinating about your films of late, too. I think it's, the rationalist approach you take in The Martian, which is, also science fiction, but very much grounded in science. Exodus, Gods and Kings is a biblical epic that approached it. I watching that movie and I find that movie so fascinating as almost a chilly, rational view of the creator, and it's as if you were to put him under the microscope. I mean, it's something that I think recurs through a lot of your work.
Yeah, a visitation if I may say so, makes as much sense as a guy meeting me at the pearly gates of the long white robot. I'm not being sarcastic. I'm saying it's a different way of seeing things, right? And
sure.
the difficult thing about movies and Exodus, Gods and Kings, I was criticized because I didn't make our leading man African American, African, and this is a critic, and I said, "How do you know? Were you there?" And that was the answer. You know, he could have been North African, but why? It doesn't seem to make sense to even wrestle with that idea. You can have it that way or have it not that way.
I want to, this will be my last question before we turn it over to our readers. And I foreshadowed this earlier in the conversation. Thelma and Louise was also in this week's contest. It did very well. It made it to the semifinal round and was ultimately defeated by Alien itself in a sort of Ridley Scott versus Ridley Scott face-off. I watched it again recently, and I was just taken with just how fresh and vivid it remains. What it's saying about sexism and misogyny and patriarchy feels as though it could have been made yesterday. And it feels unique in your body of work, too. Not that you haven't made other movies on those subjects, but it really feels distinct and stands out. What does this movie mean to you, in particular, in your career? And I believe it turns 30 years old next year. Have you thought about bringing it back before the public in some way?
As a career move, it was, you know, by the time I did a feature film, I was 40 and already had 12 directors in my company. So I was there to help directors move on and get directing work and gigs and film. So I was used to that. So we were into quite a lot of development at Scott Free, and this script came through the door, not for me to direct. It was me to get it going and produce. So that was the plan. And it's a bit like the artist of Alien. I offered it to 5 people who turned it down. Problem is, I offered it to guys. I should have offered it to a woman. And because all the guys said, "I've got a problem with the women." I said, "Well, that's the whole point of the film, dude." and so I was then interviewing a very good actress who said, "Listen, I love it. I've come to see it because I think it's so good. Why don't you come to your senses and you do it?" And this is a woman who's quite a big star. And I sat and thought about that, and that decided me. I decided to do it myself. But I did try, and with no regrets. It was a great learning curve because I then went through it, I think line by line with Callie Curry, where I kept saying, "Does this stuff really happen?" She said, "Are you kidding?" Every day. And so it was a big learning curve for me. And also then working with you know, Gina and Susan, honestly, the whole experience was one of the better experiences I've had. It was a lot of fun, as well as having a serious subtext. I always saw it as a tragic comedy, but it had to be epic. And so, and again, I'm a camera operator, so I was shooting that, and I wanted it to gradually become and feel epic in a sense, like we know we're headed for the last journey, because that's what it will be.
Yeah. It's wonderful, and I hope our viewers will watch that and again, or see it for the first time if they haven't already. And speaking of our viewers and our readers, I am going to go and take just a few questions from them right now. One question here: did you expect a long-running franchise from Alien, from the first Alien film? And of course, you know, other directors have taken over, and now you are at the helm of this current incarnation of it. But yeah, that's. Did you expect it?
No, you never do. You never do. No. Uh,
Yeah.
Although that said, I did try and get Blade Runner going uh, as a franchise, which took a long time to shift. But I think there's mileage in a lot of material. I still think there's a lot of mileage in Alien, but I think you have to now re-evolve. I think the alien himself is special, but you've got to be careful that he's no longer frightening, right? And therefore, one has to go to another evolution of what it could be. And what I always thought was, when I was making it, the first one, why on earth would a creature like this be made, and why was it traveling in what I always thought was a kind of warcraft, which was carrying a cargo of these eggs? What was the purpose of the vehicle, and what were the purpose of the eggs? And no one's that's the thing to question: who, why, and for what purpose is the next idea, I think.
Yeah. Another question here. What was your inspiration for making some of the scariest moments the ones where you don't actually see the alien? I know we talked about this and just the slow buildup, but it's sort of the Jaws effect, right? Of the less you see, the more effective it is.
Well, it becomes a question of money, because it's the same as Stephen. Every time you see that big shark, boy, it's costing a fortune, and it's hard to make it function because it's not digital. And so with me, I still ended up with a terrific guy called Balaji, actually. I think he's from North Africa, but he was built like a basketballer. He was, I think, nearly 7 feet tall, very thin, and tiny head, and very elegant body, and was strong as an ox, but looked terribly thin. And we were able to fit a rubber suit on him, because that's what it boils down to. So when you got a rubber suit on the creature, you have a limited amount of time you can see it. So it's best to be very exclusive.
Yes. This is an interesting question. I think there is a pretty simple but great Marxist/proletariat plot that plays itself out in Alien. Were you conscious of this while directing the film? And yeah, certainly there's of course a class fable or class observations to be drawn from the movie. Your thoughts on that?
Just what's the question?
The question is, I think there's a pretty simple but great Marxist plot that plays itself out. It doesn't say anything more, but just I'm gathering among the characters and among their, you have.
Oh, you mean the class system, the corporations?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
And the exploitation of the workers and the expendability of their lives. This also, I think, resonates very much right now.
Yeah, but without question, again, I've got to go back to Stanley, where Hal is not expendable and the crew are. And so, in a funny kind of way, the great surprise on Alien, apart from the alien himself, was that Home, Ash, was a android. And of course, made in the shape and form of a human being. And therefore, people did not suspect that actually he was a corporation man, where he was there to make sure and protect any assets of the corporation were it to be unusual or not expected or not, as it were, written in the book. And of course, they come across something that is so extraordinary, the corporation says, bring it back in a cage and let's look at it. And so, in a funny kind of way, you got a similar beat between Ash and Hal with the human beings.
And
very corporate.
And the character of Ash, played brilliantly by Ian Holm, such a chilling performance. His death scene and just his final act on Ridley, which is just to forcibly penetrate her with this object. It's just there's sort of a, I mean, it's just so bizarre too. That what was the thing? I mean, it's this Dan O'Bannon script, but just this man who's an android, but who is also, he's learned this really just horrible behavior, this kind of very repressive, like I'm gonna. Yeah.
Well, he was a repressed human, because I think it's a bit like, an AI. The moment you make an AI so smart that the AI is smarter than you are, you're already in trouble. Because he's probably a week ahead of you, or a year ahead of you, or 10 years ahead of you, and has already worked out how to get rid of you. But because of that, you've got this android, this robot, this replicant studying the human condition, and maybe being frustrated by things that he can't feel himself. And so, that became interesting with Sagoni and the magazine. Was that a form of rape? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I'm the one last, I said to him I would do this. Derek Mio, who is an actor in the series you produced, The Terror, just tweeted at me and said, "Tell Ridley Scott that we dormed together in college," and so I'm doing that now. I haven't seen him since. I've seen him only a few times since then. Anyways, he says hi, Derek Mio.
The Terror is fantastic. 10 hours. Listen, if anyone's not seen it, watch it. It's incredible. Beautifully done.
This month for sure. Absolutely should. I think we're nearing the end of our time, and you've been so generous with it. Thank you, Ridley, so much, and thank you to our Times readers for voting on these summer movies and for watching Alien and sharing your questions with us. Quickly before we close, I'm just going to say this is, of course, just only week 4. Here is what is ahead for week 5. The polls for week 5 just closed this afternoon. It's been a very exciting week of movies, including Big and Total Recall, Poltergeist, War Games, Up, Knocked Up, and Wonder Woman. And in the end, it came down to 2 very different, captivating adventure films: Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, the 2004 film directed by Alfonso Cuarón, and Finding Nemo, the 2003 Pixar movie directed by Andrew Stanton. You voted, and the winner, by our closest margin yet, a single vote, was Finding Nemo. So please stay tuned for that next week. We will be talking about Finding Nemo with a guest. I think it's hilarious that we're going from Alien to Finding Nemo. What can I say? Of such extremes is the ultimate summer movie showdown made. So I hope you all will join us for that. And Ridley Scott, it's been such a pleasure and an honor to talk to you about one of your greatest films. And thank you so much for being here with us. And I wish you
thank you. Thank you for being so kind.
Remarkable time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all, and good night. Thank you.